My wife didn't just cheat on me for 7 years. She gave birth to another man's child, had me raise her as my own, and then wrote in a secret journal that I was the safe, boring foundation for a life she secretly despised. So when a medical catastrophe brought her to the brink of death, I didn't pray for a miracle. I prayed for the truth. And when she miraculously recovered, ready to play the victim, I didn't welcome her home with open arms. I waited for the perfect moment, surrounded by her adoring family, and handed her the demolition charges. The first sound you notice in the ICU is the symphony of machines. The rhythmic, metronomic beep of the heart monitor, the gentle sigh of the ventilator, the low hum of electronics that stand between a person and the void. They are the sounds of a life being sustained, not lived. I stood there staring through the sterile glass at my wife, Ilara. Her head was partially shaved, a stark white bandage covering the intricate work of the neurosurgeon. Wires snaked from her body like synthetic vines, tethering her to the machines that now breathed and beat for her. Just an hour ago, Dr. Matthews had explained it to me in hushed, clinical tones. A ruptured cerebral aneurysm, a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage. He used phrases like dire prognosis and significant neurological impairment, which were all just polished ways of saying the woman I had married, the mother of my 2 children, was very likely going to die. Or worse, she would live, but the Ilara I knew would be gone forever. I should have been shattered. I should have been on my knees, begging some indifferent god for a second chance. But as I stood there, watching her parents, Richard and Carol, sob into each other's arms, I felt nothing. A profound, hollow, terrifying emptiness. It wasn't the shock of a sudden trauma. It felt deeper, older, like a void that had been there all along. And I was only now noticing its chilling draft. It was the first crack in the foundation of the man I thought I was. "Liam, thank God you're here," Carol whispered, her face blotchy and swollen. She gripped my arm, her knuckles white. "You've always been our rock, her rock. You have to be strong for all of us now." Richard clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. He was a man who saw the world in black and white, a former CEO who believed any problem could be solved with enough force of will. "She'll pull through, son. She's a fighter, and she has you. A rock. A fighter." The words echoed in the sterile hallway, feeling like props on a stage I hadn't realized I was on. I nodded, mumbled the right things. Of course, we have to be hopeful and played the part of the grieving, devoted husband. But inside, that strange silence persisted. It wasn't grief. It was something colder, something I couldn't yet name. It was the unnerving calm before a storm, the silence of a structure about to collapse under its own hidden stresses. The next 48 hours were a blur of hushed conversations, sympathetic nurses, and the cloying scent of antiseptic. I managed the calls to family, updated concerned friends, and held Carol's hand when she broke down. I was the perfect stoic husband. But during the long, lonely hours of the night, when I was alone in the waiting room, the emptiness began to fester. Why did her potential death feel less like a tragedy and more like an ending? An intermission? It felt like the closing of a book I had only just realized I hadn't understood at all. It was on the 3rd day that a practical problem forced its way through the fog. A hospital administrator, a woman with a kind but weary face, needed information about Ilara's private health insurance and any advance directives she might have had. I had no idea where she kept it. Ilara handled all of that, a fact I once saw as a sign of our seamless partnership. Now it felt like another locked door. "I'll have to go home and look for the paperwork," I told Richard, the excuse feeling both legitimate and like a desperate escape. He nodded, his eyes filled with a tired gratitude that made my stomach turn. Driving back to our house in the Seattle suburbs was surreal. The sky was a signature Pacific Northwest gray, the drizzle slicking the roads and blurring the world outside into a watercolor of muted greens and grays. I had designed this house. Every line, every window placement, every square foot was a testament to the life I thought we were building. A life of clean modernism, open spaces, and stability. A life of truth. As I pulled into the driveway, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum of a life that had belonged to someone else, a pristine exhibit I was about to defile. Inside, the silence was different from the hospital's. It was heavy, filled with the ghosts of laughter and arguments and the mundane chatter of a family. Our son Noah's muddy soccer cleats were by the door. Our daughter Chloe's half-finished drawing of a unicorn was on the kitchen table, its crayon colors a defiant splash of joy in the gloom. They were with my parents, shielded from the grim reality unfolding at the hospital. Looking at their things, a pang of genuine pain finally hit me. Not for Ilara, but for them. For the perfect family portrait that I now suspected was a forgery, and which was about to be irrevocably shattered. I went to our home office, another space I had designed with meticulous care, built-in walnut shelves, a large drafting table, a view of the rain-soaked garden. It was a room meant for creation and order. Ilara's laptop was sitting on her desk, closed. It seemed like the most logical place to start. I powered it on, the familiar chime echoing in the quiet room. Her desktop was obsessively organized, just like her. Folders for household finances, kids' school info, vacation plans. I searched through them with no luck, a growing sense of frustration mixing with the unnamed dread in my gut. Then I saw it. A folder tucked away in the corner, almost hidden behind a stack of other icons. It was named Anniversary Garden Project. It sounded innocuous. We had talked about redesigning the backyard for our 10th anniversary next year. But as I clicked on it, a password prompt appeared. It was encrypted. Why would a garden project be encrypted? A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It was a faint, dissonant note in the carefully composed symphony of our life. I tried the obvious passwords. Her birthday, our anniversary. The kids' names, the dog's name. Nothing. Access denied. I was about to give up, to assume it was an old, forgotten project, when a cold, cynical thought slithered into my mind. A thought so out of character for the man I was just 3 days ago that it startled me. Her life with me was the facade. The kids were real, but they were part of her world, not ours. I typed in Noah's birthday, 100,2414. The folder opened. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. There was only one file inside. It wasn't a collection of landscape designs or photos of plants. It was a journal. A single sprawling document named simply, The House I Can't Live In. My hand trembled as I double-clicked it. The document opened, and the first line I read sent a jolt of ice through my veins, freezing the very marrow in my bones. The 12th of October. 7 years. 7 years since I made the biggest mistake of my life. Not by marrying Liam, but by letting Julian go. Julian. Her college boyfriend. The charismatic, tortured artist she'd broken up with a year before we met. She had always spoken of him with a sort of fond, distant sadness, the way one speaks of a beautiful, tragic film. A closed chapter. A romanticized memory of youth. She had lied. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a memory, it was a chronicle, a detailed 7-year log of an ongoing affair. Meetings in discreet coffee shops in Portland, clandestine weekends in rustic cabins on the coast, hushed phone calls when I was working late on a project. It was all there, written in Ilara's elegant, flowing prose, the same prose that graced the birthday cards she wrote for me and the loving notes she tucked into the kids' lunchboxes. She wrote about me. She wrote about me. Liam is a good man. He is a wonderful father. He built me this perfect, beautiful house. He is the foundation, strong, reliable, and utterly soul-crushingly boring. He thinks a well-executed dovetail joint is a form of poetry. I am living in a masterpiece of architecture, but it feels like a cage. With Julian, it's different. He sees the cracks in my soul because he has them too. He doesn't want to fix me. He wants to live in the ruins with me. Our love is a beautiful, chaotic storm. My life with Liam is a perfectly climate-controlled room. The screen blurred. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the desk. Every shared smile, every anniversary dinner, every vacation, every time we'd made love it was all recontextualized in an instant. A performance, a duty. I wasn't her husband, I was her alibi, her provider. The stable ground she stood on while she danced with another man. I forced myself to keep reading, my mind numb with a horrifying, morbid curiosity. I had to know the full extent of the rot. I scrolled down, the dates flying by, a timeline of my own ignorance. Then I stopped. The entries were from 6 years ago, around the time we decided to have our second child, the 4th of June. I spent the weekend with Jay. It was transcendent. We talked about running away, about what our life could have been. We made love like it was the first and last time. Coming home to Liam felt like stepping from vibrant color into grayscale. He wants to try for another baby. I said, yes. Maybe another child will anchor me. Maybe it will make this perfect house finally feel like a home. My blood ran cold. I did the math in my head, a frantic, desperate calculation. I scrolled forward 9 months, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. The 18th of March. Chloe is here. She is so beautiful. Perfect. When I look into her eyes, I see him. I see Julian. I know with a certainty that terrifies me that she is his. A tiny, perfect piece of our real love, hidden in plain sight. I can never tell him. I can never tell Liam. Julian can't give her the life she deserves, the stability, the future. Liam can. He will be a wonderful father to her. He will love her unconditionally, and he will never ever know she isn't his. The laptop slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the desk. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. I stumbled back from the desk, my legs weak, and collapsed into my chair. Chloe, my little girl. The one who would run to the door squealing, "Daddy," when I came home. The one whose tiny hand fit so perfectly in mine. The one I loved with a ferocity that felt elemental. A lie. She was a lie. Our entire life was a lie. I sat there in the dark, the only light coming from the glowing screen, a monument to my wife's betrayal. The silent, hollow space inside me was now filled, not with grief for the woman lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life, but with a rage so cold, so pure, it felt like a block of black ice forming around my heart. The woman in that hospital wasn't my wife. The life I had built wasn't my life. I looked at the architectural plans for our home, still pinned to the corkboard on the wall, a symbol of my pride and my blindness. I calmly reached for an external hard drive from my desk drawer. I plugged it in, the soft click, an obscenely normal sound in the chaos of my mind. I dragged the folder, I copied the journal, I created a backup of the backup on a separate cloud server. Then I shut the laptop, the final click echoing in the tomb-like silence of the office. The husband who had walked into this house an hour ago was gone. He had died somewhere between the ICU and this desk. In his place was an architect who now understood that the foundation of his life was rotten to the core. And when a foundation is rotten, you don't patch it up. Against all odds, Alara survived. The doctors called it a miracle. Her family called it a testament to her fighting spirit. When they moved her out of the ICU and into a regular room and she managed a weak, lopsided smile in my direction, my mother-in-law Carol burst into tears of joy. "She knows you, Liam. Oh, thank God she knows you." I smiled back, a hollow, perfectly constructed expression. "Oh, I know she does," I thought, the words a cold whisper in the back of my mind. "She knows exactly who I am. I'm the stage on which she performs." The weeks that followed were a masterclass in manipulation, a carefully orchestrated symphony of suffering with Alara as the virtuoso conductor. Her recovery was slow and arduous, and she came home in a wheelchair, a picture of frail, broken beauty. She suffered from aphasia, struggling to find the right words, a hesitation that always seemed to earn her a fresh wave of sympathy. She had short-term memory loss, a convenient ailment that allowed her to forget any uncomfortable truths, and crippling fatigue that required constant attention. And she milked every single symptom for all it was worth. Our home, the one I had designed as a sanctuary of light and order, transformed into a convalescent ward centered around her. I became her full-time caregiver, a role I played with chilling precision. I helped her bathe and dress, my hands clinical and detached. I cooked her special meals, each one perfectly balanced for her recovery. I administered her medication on a strict schedule. I drove her to endless physical therapy and neurology appointments, sitting patiently in waiting rooms, the perfect stoic husband. To the outside world, I was a saint, a hero. The devoted husband stepping up in his family's darkest hour. Her parents, Richard and Carol, were at the house constantly, fluffing her pillows, fetching her water, and singing my praises. "We don't know what we'd do without you, Liam," Richard would say, his voice thick with an emotion I now recognized as cluelessness. "You are truly a prince among men." But in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of us, Alara's performance shifted. Her fragility became a weapon. If I seemed distracted while reading a story to the kids, she'd press a hand to her temple and whisper, loud enough for her parents to overhear, "I'm sorry, my head is just so fuzzy. Is something wrong? You seem distant." The distance she perceived was an ocean of contempt, a chasm of revulsion, but she framed it as my failing. She began to confide in her mother, her voice a pathetic, wavering whisper. "I don't think Liam loves me anymore. The accident, it changed him. He's so cold. It's like I'm a stranger to him, Mom. I try to reach for his hand, and he pulls away." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. She was the one who had made us strangers, yet I was the one on trial. Soon, her parents' adulation for me curdled into concern, then quiet condemnation. The pats on the back were replaced with worried glances. "Liam, you need to be more patient." Carol told me one afternoon in the kitchen, her tone laced with disappointment as she washed a dish I was about to clean. "That woman in there has been to hell and back. She needs your love and reassurance, not whatever this is. She feels your coldness, you know. It's hindering her recovery." I was being judged for not loving a lie convincingly enough. I was the villain for not being able to fake adoration for the woman who had systematically dismantled my reality. I was trapped, cornered in my own home, forced to care for my tormentor while being chastised by her enablers. The injustice of it was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I would go into my office, the room where I discovered the truth, and just stand there, breathing slowly, staring at the blueprints on the wall. I was an architect. I understood stress points and load-bearing walls. I knew that every structure had a breaking point. I was dangerously close to finding mine. But they didn't know about my other life, the one that began after the kids were asleep and Alara was resting, her breath a soft, innocent sound from the master bedroom. My nights became a campaign of quiet, methodical preparation. My car became my real office. I would drive a block away, park under a streetlight, and spend hours on the phone, speaking in low tones to Eleanor Vance, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Seattle. She was sharp, empathetic in a way that felt like a surgeon's precision, and utterly merciless. "They always think the sickness will be their shield, Liam," she told me on our first call, her voice a calm, steady anchor in my sea of rage. "They think it grants them immunity. They weaponize pity. Our job is to strip that away and expose the facts. We will prove them wrong." Following her instructions, I began to assemble my arsenal. The primary weapon was, of course, the digital journal. I had already sent her the encrypted file, but we needed more. We needed irrefutable clinical proof that would stand up in any court against any sob story. One evening, while Ilara was dozing in the living room, lulled by a documentary, I went upstairs to Chloe's room. My heart felt like a lead weight. She was asleep, her chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. A stuffed bunny clutched in her arms. Her dark, wavy hair was spread across the pillow. The same hair as her mother's. The same delicate curve of her nose. I had always thought she'd inherited her mother's beauty. Now, I saw another man's features in her innocent face, a ghost in her DNA. With trembling hands, I gently snipped a small lock of her hair from the back of her head, where it wouldn't be noticed. I took one from my own hairbrush. I sealed them in the separate plastic baggies provided in the DNA collection kit Eleanor had sent, my fingers feeling clumsy and alien. I felt like a criminal, a spy in my own family. The betrayal was so profound, it had turned me into a stranger to myself. I was violating a sacred trust to expose a deeper violation. The next day, I mailed a package from a post office across town, paying in cash. And then, I waited. A week later, while helping Alara with some boxes she wanted, moved from the top of our Closeta task, she insisted she needed my strength. For my hand brushed against a small, forgotten gift box tucked away in the back, behind a stack of old photo albums. It wasn't wrapped for a holiday. It was a simple, elegant box from a high-end men's boutique downtown, a place I knew she never shopped at for me. My curiosity, now a finely honed weapon, took over. "I'm just going to take these old files down to the shredder," I said, my voice even, tucking the small box under a stack of papers. In my office, with the door locked, I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a stunning chronograph watch. It was a Jaeger LeCoultre, a watch I recognized instantly, an architect's watch. Sophisticated, classic, and absurdly expensive. Tucked underneath it was a small card, the thick, creamy paper a stark contrast to the darkness of the lie it held. The handwriting was Alara's. It was dated 2 days before her aneurysm. "My dearest Jay, for our new beginning, I'm almost ready. The cage is about to open. All my love, always, E." I stared at the watch, the card, the proof. This wasn't a story about the past. This wasn't a mistake she'd made years ago and moved on from. This was an active plot. She was leaving me. She had been planning to blow up our family long before her brain tried to do it for her. The aneurysm hadn't created a tragedy. It had merely postponed her escape. Any lingering, microscopic speck of pity I might have harbored for her, the thought that maybe, just maybe, she was a flawed person who had gotten lost, evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was the architect of this entire disaster, and her only regret was that her own body had betrayed her before she could betray me completely. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. The subject line was clinical, devoid of emotion. Case number 7B341, paternity test results. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, having just dropped the kids at school. My hands were shaking. This was the point of no return. I opened the email on my phone. There was a link to a secure PDF protected by another password. I clicked it. The document was stark white, with a laboratory logo at the top and lines of black text. I didn't need to read the fine print, the scientific jargon. My eyes went straight to the final, damning conclusion. Subject: Liam Caldwell, alleged father. Subject: Chloe Caldwell, child. Conclusion: the alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the child. Probability of paternity: 0%. 0. The number was an absolute. A final mathematical confirmation of my ruin. It was a period at the end of a sentence that had been my life. I just sat there, phone in hand, staring at that zero. The world outside the car continued on. People pushed shopping carts, cars searched for parking spots, life moved forward. But inside my car, time had stopped. Then I heard it. Through the car window, I heard the sound of children laughing on the nearby school playground. It was a sound I had always associated with joy, with innocence. Now it was the sound of a life that was never mine. My little girl, my Chloe. The cold rage I had been nursing for weeks suddenly blazed into a white-hot inferno. But it wasn't a destructive, chaotic fire. It was a forge. It burned away the last vestiges of the man I used to be, the patient, understanding, good man. It burned away the hurt and the confusion, leaving behind only a single, unbending purpose. This was no longer about my pain. This was about justice for that little girl on the playground. She was living a lie she didn't create. She was an unwitting pawn in her mother's selfish game, a secret her mother was willing to take to the grave, or worse, use as a source of private, twisted satisfaction. I would not let her life be defined by that lie. I would not let her grow up in a house built on such rotten ground. I would tear it down to the studs and build something new, something honest, even if it started from nothing. I put the car in drive. The charade was over, the performance was coming to an end. Ilara wanted to play the victim. Fine, I was about to give her something real to be a victim of. I was going to take back the truth. 3 months after she came home, Ilara's family decided to throw a party. Not a small get-together, but a full-blown catered affair at our house. A home now so thoroughly contaminated by lies it felt like a stage set. They called it her rebirth celebration. To me, it felt more like a victory lap for a race she'd won through cheating. The house, my house, was filled with flowers, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Friends and family milled about, sharing tearful stories of her miraculous recovery and marveling at her strength. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, a polite smile fixed on my face, a glass of bourbon in my hand, its amber liquid a small cold comfort. I was the gracious host, the steadfast husband. Every congratulatory pat on the back, every sympathetic glance, felt like a small, sharp stab of absurdity. They were all applauding the lead actress in a play, oblivious to the fact that the set was rigged with demolition charges, and I was holding the detonator. "It's not a party," I murmured to myself, watching Ilara hold court from a plush armchair, looking radiant and ethereal in a white dress, the very picture of innocence reclaimed. "It's a stage, and the final act is about to begin." I had spent weeks planning this moment with Eleanor, my attorney. We had timed it perfectly. The guest list was a curated collection of everyone who mattered in Ilara's world. Her adoring parents, her siblings, her closest friends, the very people who formed the chorus of her victim narrative. My own parents were there, aware of the storm that was coming, their faces etched with a quiet, supportive grief for the man their son had become. The climax of the evening came when Richard, Ilara's father, tapped a spoon against his glass to call for silence. He stood in the center of the living room, beaming, a proud patriarch about to deliver a tribute. "Friends, family," he began, his voice booming with the self-assured resonance of a man used to being listened to. "Tonight we celebrate a miracle. We celebrate a fighter, my daughter Ilara, who stared into the abyss and refused to blink." He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on me with a look of profound gratitude. "But she didn't do it alone. I want to raise a glass to my son-in-law, Liam." He raised his glass in my direction. "Through this entire nightmare, he has been her rock. A foundation of strength, patience, and unwavering love. He is the kind of husband, the kind of man we all hope for in our families. To Liam!" A chorus of "To Liam" echoed through the room. I raised my glass, the ice cubes rattling, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it, a bitter counterpoint to the bourbon. I met my father's gaze across the room. He gave me a subtle, steadying nod. It was time. Then it was Ilara's turn. She rose slowly, gracefully, leaning on her father for support, a portrait of beautiful fragility. She thanked everyone for their love, for their prayers. And then she turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were shimmering with what looked like unshed tears, but I knew better. I had studied her for months. It was the calculated glint of a final, manipulative thrust, her attempt to seize the moral high ground. "And to my husband, Liam," she said, her voice soft and trembling, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Thank you for staying by my side. Even when I could feel your heart was no longer here with me." There it was, the final move. Painting herself as the tragic heroine, abandoned emotionally by a cold, changed husband, she was absolving herself and indicting me in one masterful stroke. The room filled with a collective sigh of sympathy. For her. The poor, brave woman saddled with a husband who had grown distant in her time of need. That was the cue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I calmly set my bourbon glass down on a side table. I walked to the center of the room, stopping a few feet from her. The polite smile was gone from my face, replaced by an expression of serene, absolute calm that felt more powerful than any rage I could have displayed. The shift in my demeanor was enough to make the murmurs die down. "You're right, Ilara," I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the sympathetic atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "My heart isn't here. And since our family and closest friends are all gathered, I think it's the perfect time to explain why." A nervous titter went through the crowd. Ilara's confident, sorrowful expression faltered, a flicker of genuine, animal fear in her eyes. For the first time, she was not in control of the narrative. I turned to her father first, the man who had just called me a foundation of love. "Richard, you called this a celebration of a miracle." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I walked over to him and placed it gently in his hand. "Here is the miracle you're celebrating. Confused, he took it. He fumbled with the seal, his brow furrowed. His eyes scanned the page. I watched his face, the jovial, proud mask, crumbling in real time, like a building's facade giving way. The color drained from his cheeks, his jaw went slack. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then his gaze darted to Chloe, who was playing by the fireplace with Noah, and then back to the damning page. The document in his hand was the DNA test result. The 0% probability was printed in bold, unforgiving text. His foundation had just turned to sand. Next, I turned back to Alara. Her face was now ashen. The confident performer was gone, replaced by a cornered animal, her breathing shallow. You always were one for projects, weren't you? I said, my voice still dangerously quiet. I pulled a small black USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the coffee table in front of her, the small plastic object landing with an unnaturally loud click in the dead silence. Here's your anniversary garden project. My lawyer particularly enjoyed the chapter about Chloe. She said it was very illuminating. A collective gasp went through the room. It was sharp, visceral. Carol, her mother, put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn. Alara just stared at the USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. She opened her mouth to speak, a dry, rasping sound escaping, but no words came out. The journal, the evidence of her 7-year lie. It was all there. I saved the final piece for last. From the same pocket, I produced a folded legal document. I let it unfold with a soft rustle and placed it on top of the USB drive. It was our divorce petition. My signature was already at the bottom, a firm black stroke of finality. The party's over, Alara, I said. Absolute deafening silence descended upon the room. The air crackled with shattered illusions. Every eye was on Alara, but they were no longer eyes of pity. They were eyes of shock, of dawning comprehension, of disgust. In the space of 60 seconds, I had systematically dismantled her reality, using nothing but the truth she had tried so hard to bury. I didn't wait for the fallout, for the screaming, or the accusations. My part in this play was done. I had set the charges and pushed the plunger. I turned my back on the wreckage, on the woman who was now trembling, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, as she looked at the faces of her family, her jury. I walked over to my son. Noah, I said softly, my voice now gentle, all the ice gone from it. Time to go. He looked up at me, his young face confused by the sudden heavy tension in the room, but he trusted me. He nodded and took my hand. Then I scooped Chloe into my arms. She wrapped her little arms around my neck and rested her head on my shoulder, burying her face in my neck, blissfully unaware that her world had just been torn apart and painstakingly reassembled on a foundation of truth, a foundation I would now build for her, for both of them. I walked towards the front door, my children in tow. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of every stare. I could feel the silent implosion of my wife's carefully constructed world. As my hand closed around the doorknob, I heard the first sob. A ragged, desperate, ugly sound from Alara. It wasn't the sound of remorse. It wasn't the sound of a heartbreaking. It was the sound of being caught. It was the sound of a performer whose audience had finally walked out. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool, clean night air. The sound of the party, the sound of my old life, was cut off as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. It was the sound of a cage opening. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of an architect walking away from a condemned building, leaving nothing but ruin and the truth in his wake.